Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're learning Mishnah Sukkah, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1. We really should be starting today Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6, but actually forgot the last three words of yesterday's Mishnah, Mishnah Hay. Okay, so Mishnah Hay was talking about you can't use bundles of straw and wood to use that as your schach. And we've also learned previously other that anything that's connected to the ground you can't use for schach. Anything susceptible to tuma, anything that can be susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity, you can't use for schach. And the Mishnah, the last three words of yesterday's Mishnah, which we skipped, reads v'chulan kasheris litfanas. All these things we mentioned until now that are invalid for the schach are kosher for the walls. Your walls can be made from something connected to the ground. You can use those bales of you can use those bundles of hay and wood for your walls. All the invalidations that we mentioned for the schach do not apply to the walls. And that's because when the Torah uses the word sukkos, it means the schach. That's what it's referring to. And therefore, whatever we derive from the Torah that can be used for kosher schach only applies to the schach and not to the walls. And so to the other validations, even rabbinic invalidation, like that of the bundles of wood, the bundle of wood, the bundle of straw, only applies to the schach and not to the walls. Okay, now we start Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6.
I've got a question afterwards.
Okay, Misachchen b'nesarim. Now, the discussion of the Mishnah now is using nesarim. Nesarim means wide beams. Wide beams. Now, what's the issue? The issue is that what would be the issue? So let me read to you from the introduction. A house cannot be used as a sukkah, even if its roof is made of materials fit for schach. You built a house and you built a schach out of detached wood, right? You built your roof out of detached wood. It's kosher schach because the Torah tells us to dwell in a sukkah, which means a structure built mainly to provide shade, which excludes the house in which one lives the rest of the year. Basically, the roof of your house is more than just providing shade. It provides more. It's made in a stronger manner. It provides more protection than your typical protection just from shade. And the schach is supposed to be the kind of covering that is primarily basic. That's basically just that's primarily for shade. And therefore, your roof, even if it's going to your roof, your ceiling, even though it's made out of material theoretically that could be used for schach, it's not going to be kosher for schach. Can't use that as your sukkah. Now, in the times of the Mishnah, the roofs of houses were often made of wide wooden beams. That's how they're planks, right? That's what they were typically made of. Now, according to Torah law, anything wrong with using that for schach? No, it's not connected to the ground. It's not a utensil. It's not food. It's not susceptible to tuma. So theoretically, you should be able to use even a plank, a wide beam, for your schach, if that's what you want to use. The rabbis there, however, since homes, the roofs of houses, were typically made in the times of the Mishnah with those kinds of wide beams, therefore, the rabbis decreed that wide beams or boards are invalid for schach, because if they would be permitted, a person might think that just as he can fulfill the mitzvah by sitting under the wide beams in a sukkah, just as he can fulfill the mitzvah by sitting under wide beams in a sukkah, so can he fulfill the mitzvah by sitting under the beams of his house. That's what they were afraid of. If you can use these wide beams, people are going to say, if I can use it in my sukkah, that's what I got on my roof too. So why not use that for my sukkah? So in order to avoid that kind of confusion, therefore the sages decreed planks that are wide. We got to know what wide means, but planks that are wide you cannot use for your schach. Now, Mishnah Vav reads, "Mesachachin b'nesarim." One can use beams for his schach. Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir oiser, but Rabbi Meir forbids. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says you can use beams, and Rabbi Meir says not. Now, we just said it was a decree not to use beams. So what's going on exactly? So the argument of the Mishnah is like this. Everybody agrees that if your beam is as wide as 4 tvachim, if your beam is as wide as 4 tvachim, it's about 4 tefachim, let's call it about 16 inches, a little less than 16 inches. If that's how wide your beam is, everybody says you can't use that for schach. That's for sure where the rabbis made their decree. If you sit under that kind of that wide a beam, people would confuse that with their roofs, and therefore you can't use that for your schach. What if it, and so too, let's go to the other extreme. Let's say the beam is less than 3 tefachim wide. Less than 3 tefachim wide. There, everybody's going to agree it's okay. That's a pole. That's a stick. No one's going to confuse that with their roof. The argument is going to be where it's between 3 and 4. That's the argument. When Yehuda says you can use the sarim for schach, that means that as long as they are narrower than 4 tefachim, it's good. Narrower than 4 tefachim, that's still kosher. The rabbis didn't make the decree on that. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's got to be less than 3. Once it's 3, the rabbi said you can't use it. The argument revolves around what measure of width is considered significant or significant enough that we'll say, well, if this is a significant area, then that's the kind of area that people will, a significant width rather, that's the kind of width that people will confuse with their roofs. So according to Rabbi Yehuda says we work with 4 tefachim because we find in certain cases in halach and Jewish law that an area that's something that's 4 tefachim wide is considered a significant place. For instance, if you talk about transporting something on Shabbos from a public domain to a private domain, or vice versa. So the halacha is you've got to uproot it from one domain and put it down in the other domain. If you put it down in the other domain on an area less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, you have not put it down on a significant place to be considered that I put it down in a significant way to be liable for it. So we find in areas of halacha that 4 tefachim wide is a significant width. That's the kind of width the sages said people will confuse with their roofs. Rabbi Meir was more stringent, and he said we actually find that the width of 3 has a significance. That significance is in halacha that we had previously called loved. We had halacha before that if you have a space between 2 objects that's less than 3 tefachim wide, less than 3 handbreadths wide, it's like it's filled in. Once it gets to 3 tefachim and more, it's too wide to ignore. So therefore, we say, according to Rabbi Meir, what's a width that we consider significant enough that people will confuse with their roof once it's 3 tefachim wide, because that's already something that we see as a significant area, and therefore that's a significant area according to Rabbi Meir that you work with. So the machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda, argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir about what size plank you can't use. Rabbi Yehuda says once it's 4, it's no good, but less than 4, it's good. Rabbi Meir says once it's 3, it's no good. Only less than 3 is good, and the halacha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That as long as less than 4, it's kosher schach. Next case. Nasan oleha neser, you put on top of your sukkah neser shurachav arba tefachim, a beam that's 4 tefachim wide. 4 tefachim wide. According to everybody, that is not kosher for schach. Okay. Kshera, your sukkah will still be kosher. Now, the case here is that we're talking about, look at this picture. This picture, you have a 3-wall sukkah, right? Mm-hmm. You have part of the sukkah has the branches, right? And then part of the schach, rather, has the branches. And then the rest of it is a beam, 4 tefachim wide. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, so what you really have here is you got 3-walled sukkah, and your roof is partial schach and partial beam. Okay? Or partial beam. Now, that beam, as we said before, is not kosher schach. But the rest of the roof has kosher schach, and it has and it has the minimum, at least the minimum amount of an area of a sukkah to be a kosher sukkah, which is 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. The Mishnah says that if your board is 4 tvachim and it's against one of the walls, that's the point here. It's against one of the walls, so it's separated between the wall and the schach, right? Imagine if you, let's say, instead of that board on top, just imagine you had a big wide open gap of airspace. Okay, so you've got the schach on 2 walls, a big gap, and a 3rd wall. Do you have a 3-walled sukkah? You don't. The gap separates between the wall and the schach, right? The wall has to be up to the schach. The Mishnah is saying here that when you have a board that's 4 tvachim wide, which is not kosher to be used for schach, but that's filling in the gap, that is what's separating between your wall and the schach, your sukkah is still kosher. Why? What do you mean? What happened to the gap between the schach and the wall? The answer is that we consider that part on your roof as the wall. You see, what happens is the wall goes up and then it bends over. There's a halacha Moshe Sinai. That means it's a tradition from Moshe, from Har Sinai. It's something that was oral, not written down. Or rather, it doesn't have any kind of source in the Torah. That there is this concept called dofan akuma, the crooked wall. The wall bends. Up to 4 tfachim, your wall will bend. If up to 4 tfachim, your wall will bend, then that means that now my wall is touching the schach. And therefore, the Mishnah said that when you put that board next to the wall, up against the schach, it's 4 tvachim wide, up to 4 tvachim wide, ksheira, the sukkah is kosher, because the wall can bend that far. Okay? But the Mishnah then says, but you can't sleep under that part. You can't sleep under that part, and you can't eat under that part. Now, as we said before, the only way that this crooked wall concept is going to work is only if I have I have kosher schach covering the area, the minimum area of a sukkah. If I don't have kosher schach, the minimum area of a sukkah, which means I don't have an area of a kosher sukkah, then a bent wall is not going to help me. If I have the area meaning if after I bend my wall, I have kosher schach that covers the area, the minimum area of a sukkah, which is 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, then my crooked wall will come together with the schach, and everything is going to be kosher. The sukkah will be kosher. If I don't have that minimum of 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim of kosher schach, I don't have a sukkah. A wall bending over is not going to help me. I don't have an area covered by kosher schach. I don't have the minimum area of a sukkah that's covered by kosher schach. So it can't be kosher. So there's got to be at least 7 by 7 tvachim on top of kosher schach, so that now, after my wall bends over and connects to the schach, I have an area covered by kosher schach. Now, the question is, though, that now that I have a kosher sukkah, maybe I can sit under the bent wall too, because I have a kosher sukkah. The answer is, you're right, you have a kosher sukkah, but you can't sit under that part of the sukkah. Once it's 4 tfachim wide, once it's an area of, let me just make sure you get right. Once it is 4 tfachim, once 4 tfachim wide, that's considered a significant area. As we said before, 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim at least is a significant area. Because it's a significant area, it's like its own area of the sukkah. So it's the wall of the sukkah. The rest of the sukkah is kosher, but that part under it isn't kosher. So if you want to do the mitzvah of sleeping in the sukkah, you can't sleep under it. You want to do the mitzvah of eating under it, you can't eat under it. But if I have a good wall, at least I have a kosher. You're welcome. Louis Michigas. Go ahead.
Basically, you have a sukkah that's built next to the house, and you have an overhang on the house.
Don't sit on